Ladies and gentlemen, life is a way of bringing us to moments we never imagined. Moments that test our faith, our strength, and even our very breath. There was a night when everything changed. A night when a drug entered my body and I didn't even know what was happening. My heart slowed. My breath grew shallow. And then it stopped. Darkness surrounded me, but in that stillness, something extraordinary happened. Instead of fear, I felt a peace that words cannot fully capture. I was lifted from the pain, from the chaos, and I found myself in the presence of light so radiant, so pure, it could only come from one source. It all began with something I never expected, something that happened so quickly it almost felt unreal. One moment I was living life as usual, surrounded by the ordinary rhythms of my day, and the next I was plunged into a situation that changed everything. I was drugged. At first, I didn't realize it. There was no warning, no clear sign that something was wrong. My body felt strange, my thoughts began to blur, and I could sense that I was losing control. The simplest things, like breathing or holding on to awareness, started slipping away from me. It was as if I had been pulled into a current I could not fight against, and with each passing second, I was being carried further from the world I knew. The confusion was overwhelming. I remember trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to steady myself, but my body was no longer responding the way it should. There is a certain terror that rises when you realize that something foreign has invaded your system and you can't stop it. It's like being trapped inside your own body, screaming silently, but no one can hear you. My mind was racing yet slowing at the same time. I wanted to cry out for help, but the words were stuck, as if my voice had been stolen before I could form the sound. My breathing, something I had never even thought about before, because it's so natural, began to falter. At first, it was shallow. Then it grew weaker, harder to maintain. Panic set in as my chest tightened. Each breath felt like I was dragging air through heavy chains, and I could sense that the simple act of staying alive was slipping out of my hands. It is a terrifying thing to realize that the one function keeping you here, your breath, can be stolen so quickly. The drug was stronger than my will, stronger than the natural instincts my body relied on. And then came the moment I stopped breathing. Everything went still. It wasn't like drifting to sleep or fainting. It was final. My body ceased its fight. The oxygen that gave me life was cut off, and the silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever known. In that silence, fear should have been louder than ever, yet strangely, there was a separation between my body and my awareness. My body was done, but something in me was still awake, still conscious, still aware of what was happening. That awareness was both haunting and mysterious. Time in those moments felt strange, as if it had stretched and collapsed all at once. Seconds carried the weight of hours. The fragility of life had never been clearer to me. We often live as though we are untouchable, as though tomorrow is promised and the next breath is guaranteed, but in that moment, I saw how quickly it could all disappear. A substance I didn't choose, a circumstance beyond my control, had the power to end everything. My story, my memories, my future, it all balanced on the edge of a breath I could no longer take. As the last of my physical strength faded, a realization settled in. I had been completely powerless against what had happened. I didn't know how or why it occurred, only that I was facing something far bigger than me. In that helplessness, there was no way to fight back. My body had surrendered, my lungs had failed, and the natural rhythm of life had been interrupted. That was the moment when the physical world began to fade into something I could not explain, a crossing into the unknown, triggered by the simple yet devastating fact that I had been drugged and my breathing had stopped. The moment my breath stopped, I expected fear to consume me. I thought the darkness would be heavy, suffocating, filled with the panic of finality. But what came was entirely different from anything I had ever imagined. At first, there was a deep stillness, a silence that was almost too vast to describe. It was not the silence of a room with no sound, but the silence of everything being paused, as if the world had been set aside and time no longer applied. The weight of my body, the struggle of breathing, the confusion of being drugged, all of it slipped away like water running off my skin. I was no longer bound to the pain that had moments before felt unbearable. Instead of terror, there was a strange peace. It was as though the fear that had always lingered in the background of my life, fear of loss, fear of death, fear of the unknown, had been stripped from me in an instant. I found myself aware, conscious, yet completely free from the limitations of my body. The darkness that surrounded me wasn't empty or threatening. It was more like a doorway, a place of transition, waiting for me to step through. I could sense that I had crossed a threshold, leaving behind the physical and entering into something greater. What struck me most in those first moments was the lightness. I didn't feel the heaviness of my body, the weight of my chest, or the pain that had gripped me before. I wasn't gasping. I wasn't fighting. I was simply there, present in a way that felt clearer and purer than anything I had ever known. It was as though my true self, the part of me untouched by fear or failure, had been revealed. In the absence of breath, I was more alive in awareness than I had ever been in the flesh. The space around me began to shift. What had started as deep darkness slowly gave way to something I could not quite explain in ordinary words. It wasn't a physical place, yet it felt more real than anything physical. The atmosphere carried a sense of safety, like being wrapped in an embrace that could never let me go. There was no confusion, no disorientation. I understood, without needing words, that I was no longer confined to the world I had always known. I had crossed into a reality that stretched beyond human comprehension. I felt drawn forward, not by force, but by a gentle pull, like the tide pulling you back into the ocean. There was no resistance in me. I wanted to follow it, to see where it led. I wasn't leaving behind life with regret or sorrow. I was stepping into something that felt like the truest home I had ever approached. It was familiar and yet completely new, like remembering something I had always known but had long forgotten. Every trace of fear was gone. In its place was peace that carried depth, warmth, and clarity. I didn't hear words, but I felt assurance, as if every doubt and question I had carried in life no longer mattered. The threshold I had crossed was not one of ending, but of awakening, and in that awakening, the chaos of my last moments on earth lost its power. The drug, the struggle to breathe, the helplessness, it all seemed so small compared to the vastness of where I now found myself. I had always thought of death as something cold and final, a shutting of a door you could never reopen. But in that space, I realized it was nothing like that. It was more like walking through a veil, thin and delicate, into a place waiting to receive me. The crossing wasn't harsh or violent. It was gentle, as though I had been carried by hands I couldn't see, lifted out of suffering into something beyond human language. I had stepped into the unknown, but instead of being met with fear, I was met with peace that felt infinite. As I moved further into that place beyond what I had ever known, the peace that surrounded me grew stronger, fuller, almost tangible. It wasn't just a feeling. It was as if every part of my being was saturated in calm and comfort, in something beyond earthly comprehension. And then, through that stillness, I became aware of a presence. It was not distant, not hidden, but unmistakably near. There was no need for an introduction, no need for explanation. I knew who it was without a shadow of doubt. It was Jesus. The realization didn't come with fear or trembling. It came with recognition. Like finally seeing someone you've known your entire life, someone who's been waiting for you, someone whose love has been silently guiding you even when you never noticed. His presence carried such weight, yet it was not a burden. It was overwhelming in the most freeing way. Every part of me that had ever felt small, broken, or lost was instantly seen, instantly known, instantly embraced without a single word needing to be spoken. There was light around him, but it wasn't the kind of light that hurts your eyes or blinds you. It was living light, flowing, radiant, warm. It seemed to come not just from him, but through him, and it poured into me like a river, filling every empty place, every hollow corner of my soul. It wasn't only outside me. It moved inside me until I felt that I wasn't just standing near the light. I was being transformed by it. His eyes, though I can hardly describe them, held everything. They carried authority and tenderness at once. In them I saw strength beyond measure, but also kindness deeper than words could capture. Looking into those eyes, I felt as though he had known me completely since before time began. Every mistake, every regret, every failure I had ever carried seemed to surface, yet there was no condemnation, no rejection. Instead, there was understanding and love so profound it brought a release I had never felt before. I didn't hear his voice the way we hear human voices, yet I knew exactly what he was saying. His presence spoke louder than words. It was communication spirit to spirit, deeper than language. And the message was clear: I was loved, not for what I had done, not for what I had failed to do, not for who I pretended to be, but simply because I was his. That love carried no conditions, no boundaries. It was steady, unwavering, eternal. In that moment with him, time didn't exist. The weight of the past, the anxiety of the future, the brokenness of my life, all of it melted away in his nearness. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't striving to earn anything. I was simply being, and in that being, I was accepted fully. His nearness was enough. His love was enough. And it filled me in a way that nothing in this world ever had. I remember realizing how different his love was from anything I had experienced on earth. Human love, even at its best, is fragile, complicated, sometimes conditional. But his love was pure. It asked for nothing in return, and yet it gave everything. It healed, it restored, it lifted. It was as if every wound I had carried, seen and unseen, was touched by his presence and made whole. The encounter was not a vision or a dream. It was reality more real than the reality I had known before. Standing in that presence, I finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a home of bricks or walls, but a home where my soul was at rest, where every longing found its answer, and where the emptiness that had followed me through life had been completely filled. Jesus was not far away, not unreachable, not a story or a memory from Scripture. He was alive, he was real, and he was right there with me. What struck me most about being in his presence was the complete absence of judgment. I had lived much of my life with an inner weight of shame, regrets that whispered in the quiet hours, mistakes that seemed to define me more than anything else. There had always been that hidden fear that if I were truly seen for who I really was, then rejection would surely follow. But standing there before him, there was none of that. Every part of me was laid bare, every memory, every hidden thought, every weakness. Yet instead of condemnation, I felt love washing over me, wave after wave, relentless and pure. It wasn't the kind of love that overlooks wrongs by pretending they aren't there. It was the kind of love that sees everything fully and chooses to embrace anyway. It was stronger than my failures, stronger than my doubts, stronger than the darkest moments I had ever lived through. In his presence, there was no hiding, but there was also no fear. The things that once felt like chains on my soul dissolved under the power of his acceptance. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain. I was simply known. And in being known, I was loved without limit. I had always thought that meeting Jesus would come with a reckoning, that perhaps he would point out everything I had done wrong, every moment I had fallen short. But what I experienced was the exact opposite. His eyes carried no accusation, no anger, no disappointment. Instead, they carried compassion so deep that it was almost overwhelming. It was as if he was saying, I know all of it, and I still choose you. That truth sank deeper into me than anything else ever had. The love I felt in that space was unlike any love I had encountered on earth. Human love often carries conditions, often depends on behavior, often falters when tested. But his love had no cracks, no weaknesses, no limits. It was whole, unshakable, and constant. It didn't rise and fall with my actions. It simply was. It filled the air, filled my heart, filled every place that had ever been empty. It didn't ask me to perform, to measure up, or to prove my worth. It declared my worth without a single word spoken. What surprised me was how that love felt both overwhelming and gentle at the same time. It was powerful enough to undo years of pain, and yet tender enough to touch the most fragile parts of me without causing harm. It was like a fire that burned but did not destroy, like light that exposed but did not shame. The more I rested in it, the more I realized that this was what I had been longing for all my life, even when I hadn't known it. Every search for acceptance, every attempt to be seen and valued was answered in that one encounter. There was also a sense of belonging that words can barely hold. In his love, I wasn't just forgiven, I was claimed. I wasn't just tolerated, I was cherished. The insecurities that had haunted me, the questions of whether I mattered, all disappeared in that presence. For the first time, I understood that I was loved not because of what I could offer, but because of who he is. His nature is love, and that love was now embracing me fully, without hesitation, without restraint. The absence of judgment didn't mean the absence of truth. I was fully aware of my life, my mistakes, the things I had done and left undone. But in that space, truth was not a weapon. Truth was met with grace. Where I expected condemnation, there was mercy. Where I expected distance, there was closeness. Where I expected anger, there was kindness. It was as if every fear I had carried about being unworthy had been a lie, and now in his presence, the truth of his love was setting me free. As I stood in that light, overwhelmed by love that had no conditions, I became aware of something more. It was not only about being received, not only about being embraced in that eternal presence. There was also a sense of direction, of purpose being spoken into me without words. It was as though every fiber of my being was being reminded of something I had forgotten, that my life was not finished. I had not been brought this far to remain in that place forever, at least not yet. There was still something for me to do. The realization came not as a demand, not as a command shouted from above, but as a gentle truth written across my soul. Go back. There is more for you to live, more for you to share, more for you to give. I felt him communicating that my story was not over. The darkness I had passed through, the drug that had silenced my breath, the very moment of death itself. None of it was the final chapter. There was still purpose attached to my existence, a calling that stretched beyond what I had already seen. It was almost as if I could feel his heart for the world, his longing for people to know the same love I was experiencing. And I realized I had a role in carrying that message back with me. My survival would not be meaningless. My return would carry weight, not just for me, but for those who needed hope, for those who felt lost, for those who believed they were beyond redemption. The thought of leaving his presence felt almost impossible. There was nothing in me that wanted to turn away from the light, from the safety, from the fullness of love. And yet, at the same time, there was a certainty that going back was necessary. It was as if he was assuring me that I could take what I had received and bring it into the world I had left behind. That world was broken, yes, but it was also where my voice was meant to be heard, where my journey was meant to continue. I wasn't being sent back as punishment. I was being entrusted with something precious, the truth of what I had seen, the reality of what I had felt. There was no sense of rejection in the idea of returning. Instead, there was a sense of trust, as though he was saying, "You are capable of carrying this. You are strong enough to live this out." That trust filled me with courage I didn't know I had. For so long I had believed I was small, insignificant, my life just another drop in the ocean of humanity. But in his presence I realized that every life matters, that every story carries weight, and that mine was not finished because there was still meaning attached to it. I began to understand that what had happened to me, the drug, the breath leaving my body, the crossing into that sacred space was not random. It was part of a greater picture, a greater story, and my task was to return and tell it. To share with others that there is something beyond the pain, beyond the fear, beyond even death itself. To live not with dread of the end, but with assurance of the love that waits beyond it. This was not just a mission, it was an invitation to live differently, to carry the light of that encounter into a world that often feels so dark. The clarity of that moment pierced through every doubt. I knew I could not stay, not yet. My heart ached at the thought of leaving his presence, but there was also a deep knowing that my time here was not wasted, that the reason I had been pulled back into life was for something greater than I had ever imagined. It was purpose, pure and undeniable, given not through a speech or a command, but through love itself shaping me and sending me back. The return was sudden, like being pulled from one world into another in the span of a heartbeat. One moment, I was standing in that place of light and love, certain I had crossed over for good, and the next I was thrust back into the heaviness of my body. Breath rushed into my lungs as though it had been waiting all along, forcing my chest to rise and fall with painful urgency. My eyes opened, and I was met once again with the reality of this world, the weight, the sounds, the struggle of life pressing down on me. It was jarring, like waking from the most vivid dream, only to discover that the dream was more real than the waking world. The shock of coming back was almost unbearable. My body felt foreign, heavy, clumsy. It was as though my spirit had been free, unbound, and now was being forced into something too small, too fragile to contain it. Every breath felt sharp. Every heartbeat thundered in my chest, reminding me of the fragility of life. I knew I should not have survived. By all accounts, I should have remained lifeless, gone without return. Yet here I was, alive again, carried back by a power beyond human explanation. I realized very quickly that nothing about my survival was ordinary. I had not willed myself to live. My strength had not pulled me through. Something greater had intervened, something beyond medicine, beyond logic. My lungs, once still, were breathing. My heart, once silenced, was beating. And the awareness of this truth filled me with awe that overshadowed even the disorientation. The contrast between where I had been and where I now found myself was overwhelming. There, I had felt peace so deep it seemed infinite, love so pure it left no room for fear. Here, I returned to pain, to brokenness, to the imperfections of life. Yet even in the discomfort of waking up again, there was a sense of gratitude that I could not shake. Every breath became precious. Every beat of my heart a reminder that I had been given another chance. I lay there stunned by the realization that I was back in a world that had nearly let me go. The drug that had stolen my breath no longer had power over me. Death itself had released its grip. The impossibility of my return made one thing clear. I was alive for a reason. The same presence that had spoken to me in silence, the same love that had embraced me beyond time, had also sent me back here. The experience of returning was not just about survival. It was about awakening. I could no longer look at life the same way, could no longer see my days as ordinary. The fact that I had been given back breath, that my body had been revived against all odds, meant that every moment from here on carried weight. My return was not an accident. It was a gift, one I had to honor with how I lived as I settled into the reality of being alive. Again, the weight of what I had experienced began to sink deeper into me. I knew that I had been brought back not only to continue living, but also to share the truth of what I had seen and felt. The overwhelming message that stayed with me was that no one is ever truly alone, no matter how dark their life feels or how hopeless their situation seems. In that sacred encounter, I had been shown a love that reached me even when my breath had stopped, and I realized that same love is available to every soul in every circumstance. The memory of his presence became a kind of anchor in my spirit. I couldn't shake the clarity that had been given to me. There is always hope. For so long, people live under the weight of believing they are unseen, forgotten, or beyond saving. I had carried those feelings myself at times, struggling with doubts, with the quiet ache of wondering if my life truly mattered. But after what I had experienced, I knew without question that none of us are abandoned. Even in the darkest valleys, even when death itself tries to take hold, that love is still near, waiting, ready to surround and lift us. Sharing this truth became not just something I wanted to do, but something I felt compelled to do. How could I keep silent after encountering such peace, such unconditional love? I understood that the message was not mine alone. It was meant for others, especially those who feel trapped by despair. It was meant for the brokenhearted, for the ones who think their failures define them, for the ones who believe they've gone too far to be welcomed back. My story was living proof that love is stronger than fear, stronger than mistakes, stronger than even death itself. The idea of hope shifted for me from being a distant idea to being a living reality. It wasn't just about believing things might get better someday. It was about knowing there is a presence that never leaves, even when everything else fades. I had seen it, felt it, lived it. I understood now that part of my purpose in returning was to remind others of this truth. To look into the eyes of those who feel like giving up and tell them that they are not alone, that they are loved beyond measure, and that their story is not over. Every time I spoke of it, every time I reflected on it, I felt the same certainty rise up within me. My life was spared so that I could carry this message into places where hopelessness tries to rule. The light I had seen was not meant to stay hidden in that other place. It was meant to shine here in this world through the words I speak and the way I live. That hope is real. It is unshakable, and it is for everyone who will simply receive it. Life had always felt fragile in certain ways, but after that experience, its fragility became clearer than ever. I understood in the deepest part of me how quickly everything can change, how one breath can be the difference between being here and being gone. The drug had stolen that breath from me, and in those moments when I crossed over, I saw how delicate the line between life and death truly is. For years, I had taken breath for granted, waking up each day assuming there would always be another tomorrow, another chance, another heartbeat. But now, every single breath felt like a miracle, a reminder of how precious this gift of life really is. Even with that fragility, there was also something greater I carried back with me, an awareness of love that endures beyond everything. The love I encountered was not temporary, not tied to whether I was breathing or not dependent on time or circumstance. It was eternal, stretching beyond death, beyond pain, beyond fear. That love was steady, unshakable, and it reminded me that even though life on earth is short and uncertain, there is something lasting, something greater that holds us no matter what happens. I began to see my own story differently. Before, I often thought about life in terms of survival, in terms of what I had to do, in terms of what was missing. After returning, I realized that life is not about how long we live, but about what fills those moments we are given. And the only thing that truly fills them in a way that lasts is love. Not the imperfect love that rises and falls with human weakness, but the eternal love that I had stood in, the love that met me when I should have been gone. That love changes the way you see everything. It changes the way you value people, the way you speak, the way you use your time. I couldn't look at ordinary days the same way anymore. Waking up, seeing the light of morning, hearing the sound of my own breath, it all carried weight now. It was no longer routine. It was sacred. The small things mattered in a way they never had before. because I knew how quickly they could vanish. The moments with people I cared about, the chances to offer kindness, the opportunities to live with purpose, these became treasures instead of tasks. The eternal love I had encountered became the thread tying it all together. It was a reminder that nothing is wasted, no moment is too small, no life is insignificant. That love is always present, always holding, always stronger than the fragility of our human existence. Life may be uncertain, but love never is. And because of that love, every breath, every step, every day has meaning that cannot be taken away. Life had always felt fragile in certain ways, but after that experience, its fragility became clearer than ever. I understood in the deepest part of me how quickly everything can change, how one breath can be the difference between being here and being gone. The drug had stolen that breath from me, and in those moments when I crossed over, I saw how delicate the line between life and death truly is. For years, I had taken breath for granted, waking up each day assuming there would always be another tomorrow, another chance, another heartbeat. But now, every single breath felt like a miracle, a reminder of how precious this gift of life really is. Even with that fragility, there was also something greater I carried back with me, an awareness of love that endures beyond everything. The love I encountered was not temporary, not tied to whether I was breathing or not dependent on time or circumstance. It was eternal, stretching beyond death, beyond pain, beyond fear. That love was steady, unshakable, and it reminded me that even though life on earth is short and uncertain, there is something lasting, something greater that holds us no matter what happens. I began to see my own story differently. Before, I often thought about life in terms of survival, in terms of what I had to do, in terms of what was missing. After returning, I realized that life is not about how long we live, but about what fills those moments we are given. And the only thing that truly fills them in a way that lasts is love. Not the imperfect love that rises and falls with human weakness, but the eternal love that I had stood in, the love that met me when I should have been gone. That love changes the way you see everything. It changes the way you value people, the way you speak, the way you use your time. I couldn't look at ordinary days the same way anymore. Waking up, seeing the light of morning, hearing the sound of my own breath, it all carried weight now. It was no longer routine, it was sacred. The small things mattered in a way they never had before, because I knew how quickly they could vanish. The moments with people I cared about, the chances to offer kindness, the opportunities to live with purpose, these became treasures instead of tasks. The eternal love I had encountered became the thread tying it all together. It was a reminder that nothing is wasted, no moment is too small, no life is insignificant. That love is always present, always holding, always stronger than the fragility of our human existence. Life may be uncertain, but love never is. And because of that love, every breath, every step, every day has meaning that cannot be taken away.